"I'm filthy, inside and out," she said. The rancher pulled back the blanket and froze in shock. It was an unusually chilly morning on the ranch. The sun had just started to rise, painting the sky with shades of pink and orange, and the air smelled fresh with the scent of wet earth and pine trees. Tom, the rancher, was already outside, tending to his animals and checking the fences. He had lived on this land all his life, and the routine of ranch work was both familiar and comforting. The sound of roosters crowing, the lowing of cattle, and the gentle rustle of the wind through the trees made the world feel steady and safe. But today, something unusual would interrupt that calm. As Tom walked along the dirt path leading to the barn, he noticed a figure near the gate. At first, he thought it might be a lost traveler or a hiker passing through. But as he got closer, he realized it was a young woman. She was standing there awkwardly, her shoulders slumped, her clothes muddy and torn. Her hair was tangled and wet from the morning dew, and she shivered slightly in the cold air. Tom could see the dirt streaked across her face, and the exhaustion in her eyes told a story of hardship even before she spoke. "Are you okay?" Tom asked gently, keeping a safe distance. He wasn't sure what he might be walking into, but something in the woman's gaze held him in place. She looked fragile, as if the world had already weighed heavily upon her shoulders, and yet there was a quiet strength that refused to let her fall completely. The woman's lips trembled and she let out a faint, almost inaudible sigh. I don't know," she admitted. Her voice was low, raw with emotion. "I'm filthy, inside and out." Her words were strange, heavy, and full of meaning that Tom couldn't fully understand at that moment. He could see she wasn't just speaking about being dirty. There was pain, shame, and exhaustion behind her words, something that ran deeper than the surface. Tom took a cautious step closer, offering her a reassuring smile. "Well, you're here now," he said. "Let's get you out of the cold first." He extended his hand gently, and she hesitated for a moment before taking it. Her fingers were cold and her grip was weak, but it was enough to guide her toward the warmth of the ranch house. As they walked, Tom noticed small details that hinted at the life she had been living. The holes in her shoes suggested long, tiring walks, perhaps without a proper place to rest. The scuffed knees and dirt-streaked clothes told of struggles he could only guess at. Her eyes, though wary, held a mix of fear and hope, as if she didn't know whether to trust him yet. Tom decided to let her lead the pace, giving her space but staying close enough to help if she stumbled. When they reached the porch, Tom opened the door and stepped aside. "Come in," he said softly. "You can warm up here." The woman moved hesitantly inside, and the first thing she noticed was the warmth. The house smelled faintly of wood smoke and fresh bread, a smell that seemed almost magical to someone who had spent nights out in the cold. She sank slightly in relief, pulling her coat tighter around herself. Tom offered her a chair near the fireplace and went to fetch a blanket. "Here," he said, draping it around her shoulders. "This should help a little." She looked down at the blanket, as if noticing for the first time that someone was caring for her. A small shiver ran through her body, not from cold alone, but from the realization that someone was willing to help. "Thank you," she whispered, barely audible. There was a softness in her voice now, a subtle change from the raw pain she had expressed earlier. Tom nodded, not pressing her for more, letting the silence stretch comfortably between them. He studied her carefully. There was something in the way she moved, careful and tentative, that told him she had been through a lot. Her eyes, which were slightly red, hinted at recent tears. Her lips, pale and dry, suggested she hadn't eaten well in a while. And yet, despite everything, there was a spark there, a glimmer of resilience that made him believe she could recover with the right help. After a few minutes of quiet, he spoke again. "Do you want something to eat? Something warm?" He kept his voice calm and patient. The woman nodded slowly, but didn't speak. Tom left the room briefly and returned with a small bowl of porridge and a cup of warm tea. He placed them gently in front of her, and she looked at the food as if it were a treasure. She took a small bite, then another, and Tom watched quietly. The way she ate was careful, almost hesitant, as if she didn't trust that food would always be there. Slowly, the tension in her body began to ease. The warmth of the fire, the food, and the simple kindness of someone who didn't judge her brought a sense of comfort she hadn't felt in a long time. Once she had eaten a little, she looked up at Tom. Her eyes met his, and there was a vulnerability there that made him pause. I didn't know where to go," she said softly. I thought no one would help me." Her words trembled with a mixture of fear and relief. Tom nodded, understanding more than she realized. He had seen people struggle before, and he knew that asking for help was often the hardest part. "You're safe here," he said firmly. "No one is going to hurt you." She let out a shaky breath, the weight of her past pressing down, but for the first time, she allowed herself to believe in the possibility of safety. For a while, they sat in silence, listening to the crackle of the fire and the distant sounds of the ranch. It was a strange, quiet moment, but it was meaningful. It was the first step toward trust, toward healing, and toward a life that could be a little brighter. As the morning went on, the woman began to speak more, telling fragments of her story. She talked about leaving a difficult situation behind, about nights spent alone and hungry, and about the feeling of being invisible in the world. Each word she spoke carried pain, but also a small thread of hope that maybe, just maybe, life could be different. Tom listened attentively, never interrupting, allowing her to speak at her own pace. He realized that helping her would not be simple or quick. It would take time, patience, and care. But he also knew that this was the moment that could change everything for her and for him. The ranch, which had always been a place of hard work and routine, was now a place of new beginnings. And as the sun climbed higher in the sky, casting light on the wooden floors and warm walls, Tom felt a sense of purpose. Outside, the world went on as usual. The animals wandered, the wind rustled the trees, and the ranch hummed with quiet life. But inside, a different kind of story was beginning. It was a story of trust, of courage, and of the fragile yet powerful human spirit. And for the first time in a long while, the young woman allowed herself to imagine a future where she wasn't just surviving, but beginning to live. Hours passed, and the chill of the morning faded. She stayed wrapped in the blanket, watching the fire dance and listening to the quiet rhythm of the ranch. Tom occasionally glanced at her, making sure she was comfortable and offering small gestures of kindness, a glass of water, a warm washcloth, a reassuring smile. Each act, though small, helped her understand that not everyone in the world would hurt her or turn away. By the time evening approached, the first part of her journey had been completed. She had arrived broken and weary, carrying the weight of her past like a heavy coat. But she had found a place of warmth, safety, and care. And though she didn't yet know what the future held, she had taken the first step toward healing. In that quiet ranch house, with the sun setting outside and the fire crackling softly, two lives intersected in a moment of unexpected connection. One carried the scars of the world, and the other carried the wisdom to offer compassion. And in that intersection, a story began. One that would test strength, build trust, and ultimately lead to a life renewed. After the first day passed, the young woman, Clara, began to settle into the warmth of the ranch house. The fire crackled gently in the hearth, casting shadows on the walls, and for the first time in many weeks, she felt the comforting sensation of being somewhere safe. The initial shock and exhaustion had begun to fade, replaced by a cautious curiosity. She didn't speak much at first, keeping her gaze low and her hands folded in her lap. But Tom, the rancher, understood that trust could not be forced. He offered gentle encouragement instead, creating a space where Clara could feel secure. Tom brought her a plate of food for breakfast. The smell of eggs and toast, simple yet nourishing, made her stomach rumble. She hadn't eaten properly in days, and each bite seemed to remind her of life beyond survival. She ate slowly, savoring the warmth and taste, but also careful not to appear too greedy or needy. Tom watched her quietly, making no comment about the speed or manner in which she ate, understanding that patience was essential. After breakfast, Tom offered her a chance to rest while he handled chores outside. She accepted, sinking into a soft chair with the blanket still wrapped tightly around her shoulders. As she sat there, Clara's mind wandered to her past. The memories she had tried so hard to suppress began to surface. She remembered cold nights on the streets, the constant fear of danger, and the loneliness that had pressed on her chest like a heavy weight. Each memory brought a twinge of pain, but also an acknowledgement that she had survived. She had endured what many could not, and now, for the first time in a long while, she felt the possibility of a gentler life. When Tom returned from his chores, he noticed her looking out the window, her expression distant. He didn't interrupt but quietly poured a cup of tea and placed it beside her. "Take your time," he said softly. "You don't have to tell me anything until you're ready." His words were simple, but they carried an immense weight of understanding. Clara nodded slightly, appreciating his patience. Trust was fragile, and she knew she needed time to allow it to grow. After a few minutes, Clara spoke, her voice low and hesitant. I didn't know where to go," she admitted. I thought no one would help me." The words came out slowly, as if she were testing them in the air before releasing them. Tom listened carefully, nodding gently. He could feel the depth of her fear, a fear born from countless experiences of rejection and pain. But in that moment, he wanted her to understand that her story mattered, that someone was listening, and that she was not alone. "You're safe here," Tom said firmly. "No one will hurt you. You don't have to face anything alone." Clara looked at him, her eyes wide and filled with uncertainty. It was one thing to be told safety existed, it was another to truly believe it. But his calm, steady presence gave her a glimmer of hope. She allowed herself to lean slightly back in her chair, feeling the warmth of the fire seep into her bones, and the first flickers of trust spark in her heart. Over the next few hours, Clara shared more of her story in fragments, as if each word was carefully weighed before being spoken. She told of a life that had been harsh and unkind, of nights spent in fear, and days that passed in endless struggle. She spoke about her family, the conflicts, and the circumstances that had forced her into difficult choices. Her voice wavered, sometimes breaking with emotion, but Tom remained silent and attentive, offering only gentle encouragement. He knew that rushing her or asking too many questions could close her off completely. Listening was the most important thing he could do. As she spoke, Tom noticed her hands trembling slightly, and he placed a warm cloth over them. "Here," he said softly. "It will help." Clara's eyes welled with tears, not just from the gesture, but from the simple realization that someone cared enough to notice. It had been a long time since anyone had shown her such kindness. The small act of concern felt monumental. Throughout the day, Tom offered Clara other small comforts: a clean change of clothes, a warm bath, and a cozy corner of the house where she could rest undisturbed. Each act, while seemingly ordinary, was significant in rebuilding her sense of self-worth. She began to understand that cleanliness, warmth, and food were not privileges for others but her basic rights as well. Slowly, she started to feel like she belonged somewhere, even if only for the moment. Tom also shared small pieces of his life with her. He spoke about the ranch, the animals, and the routines that shaped his days. These stories were simple, but they carried a sense of stability that Clara had not known in a long time. Listening to him, she felt a connection to something steady and unchanging, a contrast to the chaos of her recent life. The familiarity of his voice and the ordinary rhythms of ranch life provided a foundation upon which trust could grow. As evening approached, the conversation shifted to lighter topics. Tom showed her the barn and introduced her to some of the animals, explaining their habits and personalities. Clara watched the cows lazily grazing in the field, the horses gently nuzzling each other, and she felt a strange sense of calm. For the first time in weeks, she wasn't thinking about survival, fear, or the next uncertain step. She was simply present, observing life unfold in its gentle, natural way. While walking through the barn, Clara tripped slightly and Tom steadied her. "Careful," he said, his voice warm and steady. She looked up at him, her eyes reflecting gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. In that small moment, there was a silent acknowledgement of connection, a mutual understanding that they were both learning to navigate trust and care in a fragile, uncertain world. Back inside the house, as night fell and the fire burned low, Clara reflected on the day. She realized that, although she had arrived exhausted and fearful, she had experienced moments of kindness and understanding that had been foreign to her for a long time. Each gesture, each word of reassurance, each act of patience had begun to chip away at the walls she had built around herself. The blanket around her shoulders felt heavier with warmth, but also lighter with the symbolic comfort it represented: safety, trust, and the possibility of change. Sleep eventually came, deep and untroubled for the first time in weeks. In the quiet of the ranch house, Clara's dreams were softer, less haunted by the harsh realities of her past. She dreamed of fields bathed in sunlight, animals grazing peacefully, and moments of quiet laughter. Though her journey was far from over, this night represented a turning point, the first real step toward healing. The next morning, Clara woke to the soft light of dawn. She watched the sun rise over the hills, feeling a sense of possibility she hadn't experienced in a long time. She understood that the road ahead would be challenging, that trust had to be rebuilt gradually, and that healing required patience and courage. But for the first time, she felt ready to take the next step. Tom entered the room with breakfast, smiling gently. "Good morning," he said. "Ready to start a new day?" Clara nodded, a small smile touching her lips. She felt a tentative hope, a fragile but real belief that life could be different. The warmth of the ranch, the simple kindness of a stranger, and the gentle rhythm of the morning had combined to give her something she hadn't felt in a long time: hope. Throughout the day, Clara began to open up more naturally. She shared stories of her childhood, her dreams, and even her fears. Tom listened without judgment, understanding that these conversations were the foundation of healing. Each shared story, each small acknowledgement of pain and courage, helped her begin to reclaim her sense of identity and self-worth. By the time evening fell, Clara had made noticeable progress. Her body seemed a little more relaxed, her movements more assured, and her spirit lighter. Tom watched her carefully, feeling a deep respect for her resilience. She had endured so much, yet she remained capable of hope, trust, and courage. The realization filled him with admiration and a quiet sense of responsibility to help her continue on this path. As the fire crackled that night, Clara wrapped herself in the blanket and reflected on her journey. She had come to the ranch broken, weary, and uncertain, but she was beginning to see a path forward. The simple acts of kindness, the gentle patience, and the quiet presence of someone who cared had opened a door she thought had long been closed. She understood that this was just the beginning, that the road ahead would have challenges, but she felt ready to face them, knowing she was not alone. For Tom, the day had been equally transformative. He had met someone whose life had been marked by struggle and pain, and he had seen the fragility and strength of the human spirit intertwined. He realized that sometimes the most meaningful moments of life came not from grand gestures, but from small acts of care, patience, and understanding. Watching Clara begin to trust and heal reminded him of the power of human connection, the ability to transform despair into hope through empathy and presence. By the end of part 2, a foundation had been laid, a foundation of trust, understanding, and the quiet beginnings of healing. Clara had begun to share her story, to reclaim her identity, and to believe that life could offer moments of peace and safety. The ranch, with its routine, warmth, and steady presence, had become her refuge, and Tom's quiet patience had begun to show her that trust could be rebuilt, one gentle step at a time. Days passed at the ranch, and Clara was slowly beginning to feel the difference between life on the streets and life in a place that offered safety, warmth, and care. She still moved cautiously, still kept her gaze low, and still flinched at sudden sounds. But each morning she grew a little stronger, a little more confident, and a little more willing to trust that the world could hold kindness instead of pain. Tom noticed these subtle changes with a quiet sense of pride. One morning, after a light breakfast of porridge and fresh fruit, Tom suggested she help with some small tasks around the house. "It's nothing difficult," he said. "Just a little bit of organizing, some sweeping, maybe helping with the laundry." Clara hesitated, unsure if she was capable of doing anything useful. But Tom's tone was calm and encouraging, never demanding, never pushing. Slowly she nodded, and together they began tidying the kitchen. As Clara worked, she felt a strange mixture of anxiety and relief. Anxiety because she feared making mistakes or drawing attention to herself. Relief because doing something simple and productive gave her a sense of purpose. It had been a long time since she had felt capable or needed, and even small tasks gave her a feeling of accomplishment she hadn't experienced in years. Tom, noticing her hesitance, offered gentle guidance. "That's perfect," he said as she carefully wiped the counter. "You're doing great." Her lips curved in a small, shy smile, and she felt the warmth of praise more deeply than she expected. Later that day, Tom suggested she take a short rest in the living room while he stepped outside to check on the animals. Clara wrapped herself in the blanket he had given her and sat near the fireplace. The quiet crackle of the flames was soothing, almost hypnotic. She thought about how different this life was from the streets, the calm, the routine, the sense of being protected. For the first time in a long while, she allowed herself to breathe without tension, to sit without constant fear. Curiosity began to grow in her mind, and with it, the courage to ask questions. "Tom," she said softly, "what happens if someone comes looking for me?" Her voice was low, almost hesitant, but it held a trace of fear she had carried for so long. Tom looked at her, understanding immediately that this fear was rooted in her past experiences, in people who had failed her or harmed her. He took a moment before answering, choosing his words carefully. "No one is going to take you away from here," he said firmly. "You're safe. You don't have to hide or run. This is a place where you belong now." Clara's eyes filled with tears, not of sadness but of relief. She had lived so long in fear of being abandoned, hurt, or ignored that believing in safety felt almost impossible. Yet in Tom's words, she began to feel the first real sense of protection in years. After a quiet pause, Tom suggested they go to the barn. "It's time you met some of the animals up close," he said. Clara followed him hesitantly, unsure what to expect. The barn smelled of hay and earth, familiar and comforting scents that reminded her of something she could not quite name. Horses grazed quietly in their stalls, cows wandered lazily, and the sound of animals moving about was peaceful. Tom introduced each one gently, explaining their personalities, habits, and little quirks. Clara's hands itched to reach out and touch them, but she hesitated. Years of fear and caution had made her wary of new experiences. "Go ahead," Tom encouraged. "They're friendly. They won't hurt you." Slowly she approached a horse with a glossy brown coat. Her hand trembled slightly as she reached out, but the horse leaned in gently, nudging her palm. A soft laugh escaped her lips, a sound that had been rare lately. She had not realized how much she had missed simple, gentle contact, the comfort of connection, and the feeling of trust returning slowly to her life. As the day wore on, Clara began to relax further. She helped Tom feed the animals, collect eggs, and organize the barn. Each task, though simple, made her feel useful and capable. More importantly, it showed her that she could contribute without fear of judgment. Tom's gentle encouragement reminded her that mistakes were okay, that trying was what mattered. And with each small success, the heavy weight of self-doubt she had carried for so long began to lift, replaced with the first glimmers of confidence. That afternoon, as they were cleaning the barn, Clara tripped over a loose board. Tom caught her immediately, steadying her. "Careful," he said softly, looking into her eyes with genuine concern. She felt a jolt of gratitude and something else, something she hadn't felt in years, a deep, trusting connection with another human being. The world had been harsh and unkind for so long that the kindness of one person felt miraculous. She wanted to tell him everything, to unburden herself completely, but the memories were still raw, too heavy to release all at once. Eventually, they returned to the house as the sun began to dip behind the hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple. Clara felt tired, but it was a satisfying kind of tired, the kind that comes from movement, engagement, and small accomplishments. She felt the blanket around her shoulders, and it no longer felt like a shield against a cold world. Instead, it felt like a comfort, a small, tangible reminder that she was safe and that someone cared. After dinner, Tom suggested she take a bath. The warm water was soothing, and for the first time in a long while, Clara could feel the grime and dirt of months washing away. She lingered in the water, allowing herself to relax completely, closing her eyes and thinking about the events of the day. She realized that healing was not just physical, it was emotional. Every moment of safety, every small gesture of care, was a step toward repairing her heart and mind. When she finally stepped out of the bath and wrapped herself in a clean towel, Tom handed her clean clothes. The simple act of wearing fresh, warm garments made her feel like a new person, if only slightly. She caught a glimpse of herself in the mirror and barely recognized the reflection staring back. There was still weariness in her eyes, but it was accompanied by a hint of hope, a quiet promise that life could be gentler than it had been. That night, Clara sat by the fireplace, wrapped in her blanket, and began to talk more openly. She told Tom fragments of her life, moments she had long buried. She spoke of days filled with hunger, nights filled with fear, and the countless times she had doubted whether she would survive another day. Her voice shook occasionally, but Tom's calm presence and quiet encouragement allowed her to speak freely. With each word, she felt a little lighter, as though the burden she had carried alone for so long was being shared, even if just a little. At one point, Tom gently asked if she had any injuries or lingering pain. Clara hesitated, ashamed, but eventually nodded. She revealed bruises and small cuts she had tried to hide, injuries that were a result of her struggles and hardships. Tom's face grew serious, and he realized that her situation was more severe than he had imagined. The physical signs of her past experiences were shocking, but what was more concerning was the emotional weight she carried. He knew she needed medical attention, care, and understanding, but he also knew that rushing her or making her feel judged would only push her away. With patience, Tom helped her assess the injuries carefully. He cleaned and dressed the cuts, applying ointment and bandages with gentle hands. Clara flinched at times, the memory of pain making her tense, but Tom spoke softly, reassuring her. "It's okay," he said. "You're safe now. Nothing here will hurt you." The words were simple, but their meaning was profound. They represented a promise, a commitment, and a reminder that healing was possible. By the end of the evening, Clara felt a profound exhaustion, but it was not the same kind of exhaustion that came from running or fighting to survive. This was the tiredness of emotional release, of letting go of fear, of beginning to trust. She wrapped herself tightly in the blanket and allowed herself to rest. As she drifted toward sleep, she felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a sense of safety, a fragile but real hope that life could be different, and that she could survive not just physically but emotionally as well. That night Tom stayed nearby, reflecting on the events of the day. He understood the gravity of Clara's situation, the depth of her suffering, the resilience she had shown, and the patience required to help her heal. He knew the road ahead would be long and filled with challenges, but he also knew that every small act of kindness, every patient gesture, and every moment of trust would matter. He felt a quiet sense of purpose, knowing that he could make a difference in someone's life simply by being present, compassionate, and steady. As the moon rose over the ranch, casting its silver light across the fields and hills, Clara slept soundly, wrapped in warmth and safety. The first steps toward healing had been taken. She had begun to open her heart, to share her story, and to allow herself to believe that trust, care, and safety could exist in her life. And for Tom, watching her begin to heal was a reminder of the power of human connection, the extraordinary ability to change a life through patience, understanding, and simple acts of compassion. The days at the ranch began to blend together, yet each day brought a small but meaningful change in Clara. She was no longer the frightened, withdrawn woman who had arrived just days ago. The warmth of the fire, the steady rhythm of ranch life, and Tom's gentle encouragement had begun to reshape her world. Every morning she woke a little earlier, her movements less hesitant, her eyes a little brighter. Though she still carried the weight of her past, there was now room in her heart for hope. Tom started to involve her more actively in daily chores, not because he needed help, but because he understood that structure and purpose could help her regain confidence. Together, they fed the animals, tended the small vegetable garden, and repaired broken fences. At first, Clara approached these tasks with trepidation, worried she might make a mistake or disappoint him. But Tom's patience never wavered. "It's okay if it's not perfect," he told her one morning as she struggled to hammer a loose board. "What matters is that you try." That's enough. Her first successful attempts at chores brought her a quiet joy. A simple nod from Tom, a smile, or a word of encouragement became monumental achievements in her world. Each completed task reminded her that she was capable, that she could contribute, and that she mattered. It had been so long since she felt any sense of purpose, and now even the smallest successes began to rebuild her self-esteem. During the afternoons, Clara began to explore the ranch on her own, under Tom's watchful eye. She discovered the small creek behind the house, where the water ran clear and cool. She found wildflowers growing along the banks, their colors vibrant in the sunlight. These simple, natural beauties were something she had rarely noticed in her previous life, consumed as it had been by survival and fear. Sitting by the water's edge, she allowed herself to imagine a future that wasn't defined by pain. For the first time in years, she felt free to breathe, to hope, and to dream. The healing wasn't just physical, it was emotional too. Tom encouraged her to talk about her feelings whenever she was ready, and slowly, Clara began to open up. She spoke about the nights she had spent feeling invisible and the fear that had become a constant companion. She admitted to moments of hopelessness, times when she thought she could not go on. Yet she also shared memories of resilience, of small victories that had kept her alive. Tom listened quietly, never interrupting, never judging. His steady presence gave her the courage to keep speaking, to acknowledge the pain she had endured while also recognizing her strength. One afternoon, as they tended the garden together, Clara paused and looked at Tom. "I never thought anyone would care," she said softly, almost afraid to finish the sentence. Tom knelt beside her, planting seedlings with careful hands, and replied, "Sometimes the world is harsh, but that doesn't mean kindness doesn't exist. You deserve it, and it's okay to accept it." Clara's eyes welled with tears. These words, simple as they were, carried a weight she hadn't realized she longed for. It was the first time in her life she felt that being cared for didn't come with conditions or expectations. It was simply a gift she could accept. Over the following weeks, Clara began to take small steps toward independence. She learned to cook simple meals, to clean the house efficiently, and to tend to the animals without constant guidance. Each accomplishment, however small, was a victory. She started to smile more often, laugh quietly at small joys, and even joke with Tom occasionally. The shadows that had lingered in her eyes began to lift, replaced by a light that spoke of cautious optimism. Tom also encouraged her to pursue interests beyond chores. She had always loved reading, but had rarely had the opportunity in recent years. A small shelf in the living room offered a collection of books, ranging from stories of adventure to simple guides on animals and plants. At first, Clara hesitated to touch them, uncertain if she could focus or if she deserved the time. But gradually she began to pick up books, reading aloud softly to herself at first, then more confidently. The stories transported her, offering a world beyond immediate survival, a world where imagination and learning could flourish. Physical recovery went hand in hand with emotional healing. Tom made sure she received proper medical attention for her injuries, which had initially shocked him. Bandages were changed, cuts cleaned, and bruises carefully tended. Each visit with the doctor confirmed her slow but steady progress, and Clara began to feel the difference in her body as well as in her spirit. She could move more freely, sleep more soundly, and engage in daily tasks without the constant ache of pain or the fear of exacerbating injuries. One morning, Clara was brushing the horse she had named Rusty. The horse nudged her gently, sensing her growing confidence and calm. She laughed softly, a sound that felt foreign to her ears but wonderful all the same. "He likes me," she said to Tom, who was repairing a fence nearby. Tom smiled. "Of course he does. He knows you care for him." "That's all it takes." Clara's smile lingered, and for the first time she felt the quiet pride of being needed and appreciated by another living being. As days turned into weeks, Clara began to notice changes within herself that went beyond the physical. She found herself able to trust small things, the predictability of routine, the kindness of someone who had no obligation to her, the rhythm of work and rest on the ranch. She started planning small goals for herself, like learning how to ride Rusty properly or preparing a meal for both her and Tom. These tiny steps symbolized her growing independence and her readiness to engage with the world in ways she had not dared for years. There were still moments of doubt and fear. Memories of past trauma occasionally resurfaced, and some nights she would wake up tense, her heart pounding as if danger lurked just outside the walls. But each time, she reminded herself that she was no longer alone. She had a safe place to return to, someone who cared for her well-being, and the strength within herself that had carried her this far. Slowly, the panic subsided, replaced by a quiet confidence that she could face these moments without being overwhelmed. One day, Tom suggested they go for a walk across the fields. The sun was bright, the sky clear, and the air crisp. Clara followed him, enjoying the sensation of grass beneath her feet and the gentle sway of the wind. "You've come a long way," Tom said, glancing at her with quiet pride. Clara looked around at the open land, at the animals grazing peacefully, at the soft light of the sun on the hills, and she felt it too. She had come a long way, not just in distance, but in healing, courage, and trust. During the walk, they encountered some neighbors who stopped to greet them. Clara felt nervous at first, unsure of how to interact, but Tom stayed close, offering her gentle guidance. "Just be yourself," he said. "That's more than enough." Encouraged by his words, Clara managed a soft smile and returned the greetings. It was a small but important step, an indication that she could begin to rejoin the world beyond the ranch, one careful interaction at a time. Evenings were quiet and restorative. Clara would often sit by the fire, reflecting on the day, wrapped in her blanket. She thought about how far she had come, about the trust she had begun to build, and about the strength she had rediscovered within herself. The firelight flickered across her face, highlighting the softness of her expression, the faint smile that had become more frequent, and the glimmer of hope that now seemed permanent rather than fleeting. By the end of part 4, Clara's transformation was clear. She had grown stronger, more confident, and more capable. Her trust in Tom, in the ranch, and in herself had deepened. The injuries that had initially shocked him were healing, her body becoming stronger and more resilient. But more importantly, her spirit was recovering. She laughed more, spoke more, and engaged more fully with the world around her. The ranch had become not just a refuge, but a place where she could begin to reclaim her life and her identity. Though the road ahead was still long and uncertain, Clara now faced it with courage and hope. The past would always be a part of her, but it no longer defined her. She had begun to write a new chapter, one filled with trust, growth, and the quiet joy of rediscovering life's simple pleasures. And in the warmth of the ranch, with the steady presence of someone who cared, she knew that she could continue to heal, one day at a time. Months had passed since Clara first arrived at the ranch, trembling, dirty, and full of fear. Each day of that time had brought small victories, moments of trust, and glimpses of hope. Now she moved with a quiet confidence, carrying herself differently than she had the day she first appeared at the gate. Her eyes, once clouded with fear and pain, now shone with clarity, curiosity, and a quiet strength. The scars of her past remained, both visible and invisible, but they no longer defined her. The ranch had become her home in the truest sense. She knew every corner of the house, every path through the fields, and even the unique personalities of the animals she cared for daily. Rusty, the horse she had once feared to touch, now nuzzled her hand affectionately whenever she approached. She took pride in feeding the animals, collecting eggs, and ensuring that every corner of the ranch was cared for. These tasks, which had once seemed intimidating or overwhelming, were now a source of joy and accomplishment. One morning, Clara woke early to the soft glow of dawn. The sun stretched its first rays across the hills, and the air carried the familiar scent of grass, earth, and dew. She stepped outside, breathing in deeply, feeling the cool air fill her lungs. For the first time, she realized how much she had come to love the rhythm of the ranch, the quiet moments of reflection, and the peace that came from simply being present. Life felt steadier now, less unpredictable and threatening, and she knew that she was part of something larger, a world that could nurture her rather than harm her. Tom joined her in the fields, carrying a basket of freshly picked vegetables. He greeted her with his usual warm smile. "Morning," he said. "Ready for another day," Clara returned the smile, a simple gesture that spoke volumes about the progress she had made. She no longer hesitated, no longer flinched at his presence. Instead, she walked confidently beside him, helping him sort the vegetables and carry them into the house. These simple interactions had become rituals of trust and companionship, small steps that reinforced the bond they had built over time. Throughout the day, Clara engaged fully in the work of the ranch. She tended the garden with care, making sure every plant had enough water and attention. She cleaned the barn and arranged the feed for the animals, humming softly as she worked. Even when challenges arose, a stubborn horse that refused to follow, or a broken fence that required extra effort, Clara met them with patience and determination. She had learned that obstacles were not threats, but opportunities to prove her resilience, and each challenge she overcame strengthened her sense of self. In the afternoons, Clara often took quiet walks across the fields, observing the world around her with wonder and appreciation. She noticed the small details she had once overlooked, the delicate pattern of a butterfly's wings, the way sunlight sparkled on a stream, the gentle rustle of leaves in the wind. These moments of mindfulness became a source of calm and reflection, helping her to integrate the lessons of patience, trust, and gratitude she had learned on the ranch. As her confidence grew, Clara began to take small steps toward reconnecting with the outside world. Tom encouraged her gently, never pushing, understanding that the transition from fear to courage required patience. One afternoon, they visited a nearby village to purchase supplies. Clara walked beside him, her posture upright, her eyes alert but calm. When they encountered neighbors, she greeted them politely, her voice steady. For a moment, she noticed a spark of pride within herself. She was no longer invisible. She could exist in the world without fear, and she could interact with others without anxiety controlling her every move. Back at the ranch, evenings were a time of reflection and growth. Clara would sit by the fireplace, sometimes with a book, sometimes simply watching the fire dance. She thought about how far she had come, the fear, the pain, the nights she had spent unsure of whether she would survive, and compared them to the life she now had. The contrast was stark, but it was also empowering. She had endured unimaginable hardship, yet she had emerged stronger, more aware, and more capable of creating a life of her own choosing. Clara's emotional growth was mirrored by her physical healing. Her body, once battered and fragile, had regained strength. She could move freely, tend to the animals, and even ride Rusty confidently across the fields. Each movement reminded her of her own resilience, the body that had survived, the mind that had endured, and the spirit that refused to break. She realized that she was no longer defined by her scars, but by her courage, her efforts, and her determination to live fully. One evening, as the sun dipped behind the hills, Clara and Tom sat together on the porch, watching the sky turn shades of orange, pink, and purple. Clara turned to him, her voice calm but full of emotion. "I never thought I could feel this safe," she said. "I never thought I could trust or care about anything again. But now," she trailed off, letting the words linger in the air. Tom placed a reassuring hand on hers. "You've come a long way," he said gently, "and this is just the beginning. You've earned the right to hope, to live, and to be happy." Clara felt tears prick at her eyes, not of sadness but of relief, gratitude, and a sense of accomplishment she had never known. In the weeks that followed, Clara began to consider ways to contribute more meaningfully to the ranch and the community. She offered to teach basic care for animals to visiting children, sharing her knowledge and experience. She helped Tom organize small events for local families, introducing them to the peaceful rhythm of ranch life. Each act of service brought her joy and reinforced the sense of purpose she had reclaimed. No longer just a survivor, she had become an active participant in a life filled with connection and meaning. Clara also nurtured her own personal interests, discovering a love for painting and writing. She would spend quiet afternoons creating small sketches of the animals or the landscape, capturing the beauty of the world around her. Writing became a way to process her experiences, to reflect on her journey, and to express gratitude for the life she now had. These creative outlets helped her integrate the past and present, allowing her to transform her pain into something constructive and beautiful. Friends from the local community began to notice her transformation. People who had once only seen her as a fragile, troubled young woman now witnessed someone confident, capable, and resilient. Their admiration was not just for her survival, but for the way she had embraced life with courage and integrity. Clara's story became one of quiet inspiration, a reminder that even the most difficult beginnings could lead to a life filled with purpose and hope. By the time autumn arrived, Clara was fully integrated into the rhythm of the ranch. She had her routines, her responsibilities, and her moments of reflection. But she also had joy, laughter, and a sense of belonging she had never known before. Rusty would greet her each morning, the chickens followed her around the garden, and even the fields seemed to respond to her presence, vibrant and full of life. The ranch was no longer just a safe place. It was home, a sanctuary where healing had blossomed into strength. Clara often reflected on the first days she had arrived, the fear, the dirt, the uncertainty, and the overwhelming sense of being unworthy. Now she understood that those moments had shaped her, not broken her. She had faced her fears, embraced trust, and allowed herself to grow. The words she had spoken upon arrival, "I'm filthy, inside and out," no longer defined her. She had cleansed not only her body but also her mind and spirit, replacing despair with hope, fear with courage, and isolation with connection. One evening, as the fire burned low and the stars sparkled above the ranch, Clara stood at the edge of the field, looking at the world she had helped nurture. She felt a profound sense of peace, the kind that comes from knowing one has survived, grown, and thrived. She understood that life would not always be easy, that challenges would arise, and that fear could return. But now she possessed the tools, the strength, and the confidence to face whatever came next. Tom joined her, standing silently beside her as they gazed at the horizon. Clara felt gratitude so deep that words seemed insufficient. She had found more than safety and comfort. She had found purpose, friendship, and the knowledge that she could rebuild a life on her own terms. She had been given the gift of healing, and she was determined to honor it fully. As the night deepened and the ranch settled into quiet, Clara whispered softly to herself, a statement that felt like a promise. "I am not defined by my past. I am stronger than my pain. I am ready to live." And in that moment she truly believed it. The ranch, the animals, and the steady presence of Tom had given her not just shelter, but a second chance at life. A chance to embrace hope, resilience, and the beauty of a future she had once thought impossible. By the end of her journey, Clara had transformed completely. She was no longer a frightened, weary young woman. She was strong, confident, and full of life. The ranch had not only healed her wounds, but had given her a sense of belonging, purpose, and hope that she would carry forever. Her story became one of triumph over adversity, a testament to the power of patience, trust, and the human capacity to heal.